Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic is the surprising world of peccaries, and it will be presented by Elder and Alexine. Elder is one of our Natural Habitat Expedition leaders, and Alexine is the coordinator of the Peccary Project in Brazil. Thank you both so much for being here today. I'll turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being part of this webinar. And I would like to thank our presenter today for bringing a so interesting topic of conservation, right? Her name is Alexine. She has been working for many years as a researcher, as a conservationist for many years, and studying a unique group of animals considered a very important indicator of ecosystem health, right? Today, you will learn about peccaries, why they're not considered pigs, and how they are so important for other species survival, right? So thank you again, Alexine, if you would like to present yourself and start a few things about your work. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation, Elder, and to Natural Habitat. I'm happy to be here to share my work and the beautiful, wonderful, surprising world of peccaries. So as Elder said, my name is Alexine, and I coordinate the Peccary Project here in Brazil. The project involves a team of colleagues and students that help us gather all the amazing data to help us understand better this species and its connectivity to other wildlife and habitats. Our mission is to protect native habitat, wildlife, and ecosystem function and services. We work in numerous biomes, but today we'll focus our work in the Pantanal. So as many of you know, consequences of COVID was challenging for all of us. It was difficult gathering my team in the field. Some of them would come with dirty noses or stick their nose too close to the camera, but we made it work and we missed each other. But now things are looking better, and soon we'll be able to be back in the field and actually doing field work. So just a little presentation about our study area. The study area is in the Pantanal that I will be talking about. So let me just give you an idea of where this biome is located. The Pantanal is located in Central Eastern South America. This slide highlights the upper Paraguay River Basin, which makes up the northwestern portion of the Rio de la Plata Basin, the second largest river drainage in South America. The highline headwaters regions in light green is a mixture of various types of vegetation, the Cerrado, the Chaco, the Atlantic forest, and even Amazonian formations. The alluvial plain of the Pantanal is presented in dark green. Rivers and rivers' names are shown in dark blue. And the countries are shown in purple and international borders in black. So this connectivity between the highlands and the floodplains is extremely important because what happens in the highlands impacts the floodplain. Most of the headwaters occur in the highlands and drain into the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is fairly preserved. It's 20% conversion. However, with all the recent fires we've had in the last couple of years, this number is going to increase officially. In the highlands, unfortunately, we have over 60% conversion. So it is a threat to the floodplain. So the Pantanal is one of the largest seasonal tropical wetland systems in the world. And it is recognized, its conservation importance is recognized internationally by the World Biosphere Reserve, the 3 Ramsar wetland sites, and the IUCN World Heritage site. So it is well known in that sense. It provides numerous ecosystem services, one of them being including the carbon sequestration, regulation of rainfall and river flows, and just endless lists. And before the fire, as I mentioned, 80 to 85% of it was intact. And another key thing about the Pantanal is that 95% of it is on private lands. So this makes it a bit challenging for conservation programs. A huge environmental concern are the loss of native forests affecting the flood pulse. It affects the water balance, the biodiversity, and also rural livelihoods. Besides the global issues of climate change, the Pantanal suffered a 26% reduction in the average rainfall compared to previous years, and this caused a 123% increase in these catastrophic fires. On a local scale, poor land use management is causing loss of riparian forests and associated ecosystem services, remembering that most of the headwaters occur on the highlands and it drains into the Pantanal. So when these headwaters are impacted, this will affect what happens downstream in the floodplain. And of course, the fires, 95% of these active fires occurred in natural land covers, with 28% of them occurring in areas classified as wetlands. That likely dried out due to the drought. So the fires really have changed the scenario for the Pantanal. So we need solutions. As I mentioned, 95 is in private land, so we have to work with rural communities to implement any kind of conservation plan.
Definitely, we need solutions, right? To travel again and to see all of these things conserved. But talking about peccaries, Alexine, how peccaries play a role in the conservation?
Yes, well, I hope to explain that now. And that is a good question, because why peccaries? And I hope by the end of this talk, you will understand why peccaries are an important conservation tool for sustainable land use practices. So first, though, let me explain to you or introduce to you a little bit about peccaries. So I'm sorry, I've skipped that one slide. But the first thing is that white-lipped peccaries are confined to the neotropical region from southeastern Mexico through Central America and northern and central South America, as far south to northern Argentina. So this would be the white-lipped peccary. The collared peccary use the same region, but it also ranges into the United States, Arizona, and New Mexico and Texas. And so many Americans call collared peccaries javelinas, which is a bit confusing for us here because we call wild boars javelina. So just to make that clear, so I will be calling your collared peccaries and not javelina. And when I mention javelinas, I refer to wild boars. And then we have the Chacoan peccary, which is endemic to the South American Grand Chaco. It's an alluvial plain formed by erosion material from the Andes Mountains. So it's a specific type of vegetation / shrubland, and that habitat is endemic to parts of Argentina, Paraguay, and Bolivia. So they are extremely endemic, and with all the deforestation happening in the Chaco region, Chacoan peccaries are considered endangered. White-lipped peccaries are also endangered, but classified as vulnerable. And the collared peccary is of least concern. They're doing pretty well, in other words.
So this image is really good, actually, to show people a lot of things. And exactly the endangered one, the Chacoan peccary, have you seen in Brazil? Because it's so close, actually, to the near border, so near to the near border of Pantanal with Paraguay, right? So does this species occur in Brazil?
No, it doesn't. And we've often asked researchers that work in the Chaco of Brazil to always keep an eye out when they put camera traps and stuff, because with deforestation, global climate change, I mean, really anything could happen, and maybe one day they will appear. But they do not occur in Brazil. The two that occur are the white-lipped peccary above here and the collared peccary. So let me just show you a little bit the differences between the two. The white-lipped peccary is larger in weight, 30 to 35 kilograms. Collared peccaries are less in weight. Herd size of white-lipped peccaries move in large herds, and that could range anywhere between 50 to 200 or more. And collared peccaries move in small groups, small herds. And because of that, they also do not require a very large home range. This is in hectares. And peccaries require a very large home range, being that there's so many of them, and to find enough resources, they just have to move large areas. Their main diet is fruit, so they're classified as frugivores. Of course, they will eat other things like grubs, and in Pantanal they eat a lot of aquatic plants and roots. And in terms of sensitivity to any land use conversions, loss of habitat, white-lipped peccaries disappear very quickly, whereas collared peccaries are able to use small satellite fragments that we call. So another important distinction that I strongly need to say is that peccaries are not pigs. And I think this is something I always talk about in my talks, because people always confuse the two. Pigs and peccaries had a common pig ancestor 50 million years ago, when the northern continents were still partially united. After the continents separated around 30 million years ago, the pig and peccary families evolved separately. The pigs in the eastern hemisphere and the peccaries in the west. The traits that differ between the families are numerous. Just to mention some, peccaries really don't have a tail. They have this little stump. Their stomach structure is different. Their canines are different. Like for pigs, that canine grows all their life, and that is not the truth for peccaries. And there's numerous behavioral traits. And the early peccaries first evolved in North America, actually, and only appeared in South America after the formation of the North America-South America land bridge during the Pliocene, which was about 3 million years ago. So in South America, the current living peccary species are the three that I mentioned. And there are, and they also belong in two separate families. So pigs belong in the Suidae family, and peccaries in the Thiasuidae. And so whatever pig you see in the Western Hemisphere is not native. That goes for United States and South America and Latin America. So when you leave here, what is the thing you're gonna know? That peccaries are not pigs, okay? And this is a huge issue here, because we do have the wild boar feral pigs in the Pantanal, which they have adapted quite nicely. And here you can see the big ears and the tail. Another important fact is pigs give birth to many, many babies. And they are dependent on the parents at first. Whereas for peccaries, that is not the case. They give birth to twins, and they are immediately mobile and somewhat able to flee from and defend themselves against predators, and they're able to accompany the parents easily. So that is a huge difference between the two. So now I'm going to talk about threats, and since we're on the feral pig situation, which, like I said, is quite prevalent in the Pantanal, in the floodplain, in the basin, not so much in the highlands. But this is the kind of things that we register on our camera traps, where you see a lot of sick animals, and this particular individual has these tumors. So they can be a potential threat to native wildlife. Other threats that make white-lipped peccaries an endangered species are the deforestation and consequently fragmentation and loss of habitat. Hunting and fire are also important threats. So just let me show you a little bit about these impacts. As you heard and we mentioned, there have been devastating wildfires in the Pantanal, and especially in the last 2 years with the drought and the excessive deforestation and all kinds of things that are happening. Global climate change has just made the fires go crazy. And data from 2020 fires by a group of researchers that surveyed and quantified the number of animals killed in the fire documented that white-lipped peccaries were one of the top medium to large animals found dead from last year's fire in the Pantanal. The first most found were capuchin monkeys, which was surprising. Based on our population estimates for the Pantanal, these numbers eliminated a whole population, because in an area of 178 square kilometers, 6,700 white-lipped peccaries were killed. And so for that particular habitat, they would be considered locally extinct. However, there is source populations that are available around these areas, so they could repopulate the area. But unfortunately, it's not only dependent, I mean, the fire may leave and other populations can move back. However, with scenarios like this, they lose their main food source, which is fruits. So peccaries are very connected to forested areas and fruit resources. As I mentioned, they are fruit eaters. Another important fact is that global climate change is a very important issue for fruit-eating animals, because with the reduction in rainfall, as predicted for this region, we're going to have an impact on the fruit resources.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking that, Alexine, how do these severe droughts can impact or have impacted fruit availability and other animals actually that depend on fruits?
Yeah, it's a huge concern, and a lot of times not thought of enough, because everyone is so preoccupied about putting out the fires, which is essential. But what about afterwards? What happens afterwards? Because you're losing extremely important resources for most wildlife. And so we know from our data that there is a significant relationship between monthly rainfall and fruit abundance. So when you reduce rainfall, which is happening because of global climate change, and then you have fire eliminating most of their resources, you're having you're making it a very difficult situation for frugivores residing in this area, and most habitats actually.
And what makes me think that about the birth? Peccaries are birth seasonal?
Actually, yes, they are seasonal, and especially in a place like the Pantanal that has a distinct dry season and wet season, and it does impact their seasonal. it can impact their seasonal birth period, because there are 3 known facts that we can state today based on 20 plus years of data from the Pantanal and Cerrado. One is that fruit production is correlated with rainfall. And 2 is that fruit availability is much higher in the wet season. And 3, the reproductive season of white-lipped peccaries is linked to the wet season and fruit production. This is a time when young are born, and like for you, Elder, I'm sure when you're in the Pantanal in January, you see a lot of baby peccaries. This is a time that fruit production is at its peak, and young are born, and it's a time when there's diversity and availability of fruits that is much higher compared to the dry season. So the scenario now is fruits are burned up, let's say fruit sources, young are being born, and females probably getting malnourished because they are nursing their young at that time of the year. So in the Pantanal, the climate change and out of control fires, it affects native fruit spaces and the frugivorous community. Local extinction of frugivores will cause a trophic cascade that can harm several other species such as predators, jaguars, and mountain lions, because peccaries are a favorite prey, and the restoration of native fruit through seed dispersal, through scat. So the fires will eventually end, but the damages will stay for a long time. So without fruit, you have very sad peccaries leaving, moving along. And another recent publication that just came out, thanks to GPS collars that actually measure the temperature of the animal as it also receives signal of their location. So we recently collaborated with other colleagues that work with peccaries and GPS collars. And we looked at 3 different biomes: Amazon, Pantanal, and the Cerrado. And what we found was that white-lipped peccaries were less likely to be active as temperatures increase, and decreasing their activity by almost 50% in all biomes when the temperatures were between 30 and 40 degrees C, which is between 86 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Our findings indicate that white-lipped peccaries are impacted by rising temperature, by being forced to reduce their foraging time during their prime active periods. So just another aspect that can affect peccaries, and most probably other wildlife, with these rising temperatures because of global climate change. And hunting is unsustainable hunting, especially, is another serious threat. Peccaries move in large groups. They can be quite noisy when they eat, or cracking seeds, or they're constantly grunting. They're not the most quiet animals, and this makes it very easy for hunters, especially in the Amazon, where there's all these gold miners, and they go in a group to hunt them, and they can eliminate a whole herd quite rapidly. And other places like conservation units have hunting where people communities that are around the national parks and reserves go into the park, which is illegal, of course, and hunt peccaries. And so this can cause local extinctions, and unfortunately it impacted seriously the jaguar community in this one particular national park, which was Iguazu National Park. In the last 5 years, they started to reappear again, and consequently, the jaguar population also became better. So I mentioned to you about hunting and how it's illegal here, and how feral pigs are an issue, or wild boars here for us, because they have become widespread. And so now, because they are so destructive to crops, people can take out hunting license to hunt wild boars. However, unfortunately, most people do not know the difference. And this has also been an indirect threat to white-lipped peccaries. So we made this poster here on the left, kind of showing the difference between the three and showing this is the exotic. You cannot hunt collared peccaries. You cannot hunt peccaries. It's illegal in Brazil. But unfortunately, the news media talks about hunting. Remember, I told you how they call wild boars here javali, and they put a peccary. So
Yeah.
you can imagine how this drives me crazy. And so we did this huge campaign, tried to educate, but I don't know how effective it is, but we tried to at least have these posters available where licenses are given to hunters.
You see how your work is important, how actually this webinar can be important too.
Yeah, yes, yes. Yes, it's all, it's important. You have to reach out to the community and educate, but hopefully. And another huge threat, of course, is fragmentation and deforestation, which kind of go together when you make these small reserves in their property, because legally they have here in the Pantanal Cerrado, they legally have to leave 20% of their area intact. So they can do it anyway. And what happens is we get these small fragments, which are just way too small for animals that have large home ranges. Fragments reduce diversity and essential habitats. And then you have areas like this where the riparian zone, or the forest around the rivers, are basically gone. And this is an important ecological corridor for most wildlife to move between fragments. So this also is really bad for wildlife in general, but especially white-lipped peccaries that depend on that. And I will show you more about that. So what happens? They leave. They have to leave. The fragment is too small. They will leave or possibly die. And when peccaries become locally extinct and leave a region, you have cascading effects on other species. And as I mentioned to you before, you have a top predator that loses its main prey source. So, of course, this causes, by the way, this is not a jaguar running, okay? But it's the only one I could find that represents a large cat. But anyway, so you have jaguars that depend on peccaries. You lose the peccaries, and what do they go after? They go after the livestock. And this, of course, starts causing all kinds of human-wildlife conflicts, killing jaguars because jaguars are eating their livestock. And so you see how the balance is so important. So you say, why? So what's the big deal? You lose white-lipped peccaries. It's not just white-lipped peccaries. You're creating a whole sequence of bad things that will happen afterwards. And it will affect people too, livelihoods.
Yeah, incredible. If you lose wild animals, native wild animals, and then you have more chance to lose the livestock for big predators, right? But we're talking about, now we're talking about behavior, and I just love behavior when we are seeing them in the wild. On a safari drive, for example. So what do other behavioral traits make peccaries unique, compared to other ungulates?
Yes, they are so unique in so many ways, which I like to talk about. But, like I said, I have a great team. And over here, you can see Dr. Biondi on the corner. She is from the Federal University in Sao Paulo, and she analyzes all my blood that I send to her so we can understand better the whole social cohesiveness in the herd, you know, what is their mating system. And as you know, I think most people know, ungulates, like deer, they have antlers, or usually they're larger bodied, and the male will mate with numerous females. So you would, even pigs are the same. They're, the male pig or boar is larger and will mate, is polygynous and will mate with numerous females, but not the peccaries. The peccaries are have a promiscuous mating system, and which makes them quite unique. And their sex ratio is like 2 females to every 1 male, close to 2 females to every 1 male. And what this means is that males will mate with numerous females, and numerous females will mate with numerous males. So we're talking about a very harmonious relationship, a big, happy, dynamic, cohesive, and interactive family. And you see a lot of grooming of individuals and between individuals and rubbing. And look at this picture here. They're just taking a nap, and they're pretty much all piled one on top of each other. So as you can see, social distancing is not a thing with peccaries. So if there was a pandemic, it would not work with them. So luckily, it didn't reach them. But even when they cross rivers, you know, they do it in a pack, always together, always looking out for each other. Here they're climbing up a riverbank, all close together. And they have a scent gland on the rump of above, about like 18 centimeters above their tail. And they like to rub each other's scent glands a lot. It's like saying, hello, you know, how are you? What are you up to? Or they mark trees within their range. And to be totally honest, it's we really don't know what the purpose of the scent gland is, but we can correlate it to greetings and identifying each other. And when we do see them marking trees as they move through the forest through our camera traps and stuff. And so for this reason, as you see, they're all lying here together. Oh, and I have to point out here, this one is one of my GPS collars on the animal. And we like to call them the hippies of the forest because of everything I just told you. They kind of hang out, they're promiscuous, they like to groom each other, and I do get in trouble from my colleagues when I anthropomorphize, but this is just a friendly association. So they're like one happy Greek family, or in my case, I would say Armenian family, or whatever family you choose, Italian. But yes, they are quite close, and surprisingly, you know, grooming and all that interaction is quite common. So now I have shown you various ecological traits ranging from their sensitivity to environmental degradation, their social herds and promiscuous mating system, their diet as frugivores, their threats for survival, and how they are classified as threatened species. Now you will see how these traits and their local extinction causes cascading effects on other species. I gave you the jaguar example, and we will now look into other impacts. So another important thing about peccaries is that they represent the largest biomass in the region, because we're not talking about one peccary. We're talking about a herd. So for example, a herd of peccaries can weigh, you know, 900 to 8,000 kilograms per herd. So this is huge. And you can imagine how this will impact the forest floor when they are moving in such large groups. So this movement makes them important ecosystem engineers. When you have, let's say, over 70 animals moving through the forest, it will make an impact. And they are responsible for significant soil, litter, and vegetation alterations that occur as they forage. And this activity benefits both fauna and flora. So for example, frogs, I have a picture of here of frogs, and you're wondering what one thing has to do with others. But we had a colleague that researched in the Amazon and also classified them as ecosystem engineering because the wallows peccaries form make the water last longer into the dry season compared to, let's say, natural depressions of water that occur in the forest. These wallows, he found, support reproductive activities for many amphibians and increase the frog biodiversity in forests. And they found that without peccaries, wallow breeding frogs did not have access to important reproductive habitats. Other colleagues of ours found that in the Atlantic forest, where they research areas where peccaries had gone locally extinct, he showed that white-lipped peccaries control rodent seed predation because in their absence, rodents either increased in population size due to reduced competition with white-lipped peccaries or just increased their predation activity. Consequently, seed predation of the palm, a specific endangered palm species, increased 4.9 times more by the rodents. These shifts showed that there are potential consequences for plant-animal interactions and plant recruitment that could impact many other species dependent on this particular palm, which is actually classified as an endangered species. We also had an increase of this particular rodent, which is adorable. However, it could be a potential threat to communities living adjacent this forest reserve because it carries the hantavirus. So here you have local extinction reaching out to human communities outside the reserve, and how the disruption of the balance of nature can impact you or any of us. Another important aspect is that Peccary's ecosystem engineering maintains vegetation diversity by suppressing seedlings of common trees. Not all the seedlings under the mother tree will survive, so peccaries help reduce that competition, which is extremely important to maintain biodiversity of a forest. So another unique aspect about peccaries is that they do have multiple ecological roles. And important factor in maintaining the diversity is that they predate seeds, some of the seeds that they can chew and break, but they also disperse a lot of species. And some of the seeds are just too big, like this palm here, which he's grabbing off the stalk. It's a very common palm here in the Pantanal. And what happens is you see this cheek that's full. It's full of palms, and it's chewing, and they chew and spit. They eat the pulp and spit the seed out after they're done. And they do that as they're walking. So this is also another potential form of dispersal. And then for smaller seeds, you know, they just poop it out. So they do have all these different multiple roles.
That is so nice to hear all this data and all this information, you know. And how do you get all this information? How do you collect? How do you know all this? What kind of techniques do you use at field?
Yeah, so this is years and years of data collection, and that's true, Elder. And now we have new stuff that's out. But when I first started, I didn't have a GPS or camera traps, and so I really appreciate this new technology. But a lot of the data we collect is using camera traps, where we survey fauna under native fruiting trees. And this way we can monitor wildlife populations in different size forest fragments and determine presence and absence of the different species within the frugivore wildlife community. So what's nice about this method of using native fruits to document and survey wildlife is that it actually documents 70% of the mammalian biomass in the area and in most places. Because after all, most of our wildlife eats fruit here in the neotropics. And besides that, we also document other animals that are attracted to fruits, but also to the fruit-eating species. So we get, like, here we have a tyra, which belongs to the weasel family, and they are, you know, carnivorous, but they do eat fruits. Mountain lion and ocelots do not, but the raccoon does, also eats fruits. But we often get the predators because they're tracking the frugivores, and even sometimes we get a surprise and get even the jaguar. So that's always exciting.
Nice.
Nice.
Just a heads up, Alexine, we're getting close to, yeah, so.
Yes. So we also have other rare species that are documented, like the giant armadillo and this bush dog, which are very rare to see. And what we do with this data is just discover where they're absent and present throughout different areas. And for example, with white-lipped peccaries, we discovered that they do not occur in areas in fragment sizes less than 2,300 hectares. Other field techniques include fruit census, which is very important for us to understand how the resources are available and how they eat it, when they eat it. So this was a very important aspect of our research. And of course, the capturing. And thanks to many, many volunteers that have helped set traps, build traps, and capture, we were able to capture up to date over 500 animals, which are weighed and everything about them is documented. Biometrics, blood, everything. Sometimes we get lucky and we get 2 in one trap, and these were called Thelma and Louise. We also microchip them so we can ID recaptures, and with the recaptures, I'm able to understand better their growth by aging them based on tooth wear. So we have quite a big database, probably the largest for white-lipped peccaries. Nice. And of course, we have a vet accompanying for most part, and taking blood and ensuring that everything is going smoothly. We will place a GPS collar and then track them. Nice. We also now with GPS collars, life has gotten so much easier, and we're able to get data that looks like this. Where we see where they're moving and see where they do not move. And here you can see an area where they are absolutely not using, and of course it's deforested, and how much they use these, what we call ecological corridors here.
Nice. Usually when it happens like this, deforestation area, the home range, it changes, it expands or something like that?
Yes, and that is what other data showed us, is that there was quite a difference in areas that are continuous and when their area is fragmented. So the home range in this fragmented area, where it shows the red circle, the area used was much larger, and the center of activities also split up into two. So yes, it does increase. They have to find new area to fulfill enough resources to support a whole herd of peccaries. But other important aspects, as you, oh, let me just go back. So here's more of the data you can see here, where the little red points are all locations that were documented from GPS collars. And there was also a significant relationship between home range size and the number of fruiting tree species. So you see how things begin to come together, where we know the fruits and how much they occur on a monthly basis. And now we put everything together and see how their movement is related to fruit abundance or availability. But another important aspect was the fact is, how do they use the fragments in between each other? Do they just walk across an open area and go to the next fragment? No, they don't. What we found was that they use corridors, and they do not go in open habitat to use these fragments. So again, the importance of ecological corridors. And here's an example of GPS locations, how you can see how they're just using the corridors, going from one fragment to the other. And within, this was another publication that came out where where peccaries are in a fragmented landscape, but they still moved between corridors, forested corridors, to reach different forest patches and their preferred habitats. And within their home range, herds were predominantly selecting for forest cover. So how do we use all this? That was the whole point, is to show you, okay, so what do we do with all this information? Well, the idea, our data shows how they use their landscape, and their movements help us identify native habitats best suited to maintain wildlife peccary herds, and consequently the biodiversity. So the idea is to implement and promote forest fragment connectivity by restoring corridors between fragments and allowing not only peccaries but other wildlife to be able to move within these fragments. So we've tried to work with the local community and promote this, because of course, you know, when you lose riparian zones or vegetation that are around river sources or streams, it's not good for the rural landowner. And of course, the actual species and animals themselves can help restore vegetation, where like species like tapirs can take seeds outside the forest, because they can move, they do move comfortably in open habitats. So also that is one of the best ways to do that, is just let it just grow back if you have a source forest patch, and educate the local community and reforest with them and show the importance of why this needs to be done. So we also do science fairs in local schools, so we can show how sustainable land use is a much better way to use forests, like keep cattle out of the riparian zones and leave the forested areas intact. So the peccary, back to why me, is the idea is to help identify these ecological corridors for wildlife and implement them in conservation plans. Because now we know that they are a landscape species. They are an indicator of intact forests because of all these different aspects in their ecology. The large home ranges, diversity of habitats that are required, the large herds, and how they have such a strong impact on ecosystem structure and function, but also they're one of the first to disappear when the area is not healthy. So therefore, during site assessments in the various biomes of the neotropic exposed to different intensity of land use change, the white-lipped peccary population status serves as an excellent and overall ecosystem health, and consequently an umbrella species to help identify these different scenarios when the habitat is too poor or the forest is too degraded to support a healthy diversity of animals, wildlife, and prevent bad negative cascading events. And I'd like to thank my supporters, my partners, key people that help with the research and data analysis. And of course, thank you again for the time that you gave me. And funding is always a challenge, so anyone that wants to donate, I take advantage of all of you present and how you can do that. So yeah, and now if there's time, if I didn't go too far, we can ask questions.
Thank you so much. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the questions field in your control panel. So let's get started. We do have some great questions.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of very interesting questions. So we'll start with this one. Do jaguars hunt the feral pigs?
Yes, they do. They do.
And
so that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's very good.
They help.
Do the locals hunt peccaries for food or to protect crops, or both?
Actually, depending where you are. In the Pantanal, because there are feral pigs, it's almost a form of diluting hunting on native species. So they don't, in the basin, they don't hunt peccaries that much. And in the highlands and other places, they will hunt peccaries for food and for crop damage. In the Amazon, they hunt a lot for food or also commercializing peccary meat to other communities, etc. So there's a huge impact, especially in the Amazon.
So in terms of their vulnerability to wildfires, can the peccaries not migrate to escape as certain other animal species are able to do?
Yes, depending on the fire, they could move fast enough, but these fires were raging and so fast that they didn't, it's like they didn't have time to get out.
Mm-hmm. Are the peccaries territorial? Will they fight another family that enters their territory?
I cannot answer you that 100%, but based on what we've seen, we consider, like, we know that there are, like, there's gene flow between two different populations over 80 kilometers apart. So, and based on our genetic work, so we know, like, it's like a meta population where there's somehow they're connected. This occurs in the Pantanal, and so they're relatives, and we don't see a lot of fighting between individuals. And even when I was being asked to how to deal with certain peccaries that were treated by veterinarians during the fire, and I would just say, look, if you're near a herd and this peccary was caught near a herd, I don't think you'll have any problems reintroducing it. And it worked out. So yeah, they're not that territorial. Their ranges are so big. And yeah, and I think the neighboring populations are also friends, you know, so I don't see a lot of conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. So this is an interesting one. Let's see. Does the white-lipped peccary require a minimum group size to reproduce?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question. Such a good question, because some forest fragments will say, oh, there's peccaries present. But so how many did you see? Oh, there's about 5 individuals. Will they survive? I don't think so, but I cannot answer that question fully. I cannot. But I think that the whole social cohesiveness and the interaction with, the promiscuous mating system, et cetera, would be a limiting factor. But I don't know 100%. But that is a very good question that I would like to know, actually. Yeah.
So you mentioned that feral hogs pose a threat to peccaries by introducing disease. Is that the only threat they pose, or are they responsible for? Oh, let's go with that one. Then it continues.
Yes. So interesting enough, peccaries is a more dominant species, and feral pigs will move out of a herd of white-lipped peccaries. Like this happens in the Pantanal lot. So they're around the same lake, and peccaries are just doing their thing, foraging and moving. And there's a group of feral pigs. They will move out of the way. So in that sense, they're not. But when resources are limited, of course, they do share similar resources with the fruits. But if there's no limitation in resources, we can't say that there's competition. But if global climate change begins to become an issue, that could be a potential threat. In terms of diseases, they carry the pseudo-rabies disease and brucellosis and stuff that we don't really know. And that could be a potential threat for not only peccaries, but other wildlife that share the same water resources and stuff.
Got it. So I think we have time for one last question. This one says, if feral pigs are not native to the Western Hemisphere, did they evolve from domestic non-native pigs, which were brought to the Western Hemisphere by colonists?
Well, I think, yes. I think like European boars came from Europe in ships. And for Brazil, we know that it came mostly from Argentina, I believe. You know more about that, Elder? I think most of it came from the south.
Mostly came from the south, especially in the Paraguayan War, right? At that time, most of them came.
Yes. Yeah. So
It
they
was
just kind of moved up. Yeah.
Big source of food for the war itself. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's all we have time for today. So I will hand it back to you for any closing comments you'd like to make.
Yeah, sorry I didn't leave enough time for questions, but if anyone wants, you can send me questions over email. I'd be more than happy to answer. Oh, here, let me go back a slide. You can see my email.
And thank you again, Alexine. It was wonderful. It was such a nice this year to come back to not have trips to the Pantanal from August to beginning of October, and to seeing again the peccaries in the wild. So I hope to see you again in the Pantanal soon, and with our guests here next year. So thank you again for all. Thank you, Alexine.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you both again for taking the time to present to us today. That was fascinating. I learned a lot.
Okay.
I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Please join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.